Light bowgun. It's like a heavy bowgun, but light. Yeah. Right, my main focus of these builds that I thought would be an interesting ploy would be to manage essentially overall affinity with the burst step, which is actually quite weird. And then TU1 came around and actually kind of just solved the issues for me, so I've been playing around with light bowgun to figure out a way in which I can utilize the burst stat in a more efficient manner, and it's actually surprisingly simple. So to show this, we're in the range and all we do is just do like a 1 second pause in between each burst step. You might notice that it's not coming up saying maximum might has deactivated or is no longer working or whatever it says. And for those of you that are thinking potentially I just don't have maximum might in my build, you would be incorrect, I'm afraid, because just of how simple this technique is. And there you can see maximum might is in my build and I had it active the whole way through those burst steps. The reason for this is after you actually consume stamina, you have a 2 second window to refill that stamina, and if you do lose maximum might, it's about 3 seconds, and then maximum might will reactivate anyway, which means as long as you do a burst step, pause for a second to allow that stamina to regenerate, then utilize burst step again, you are essentially getting a burst step with another 30% affinity. If you go too quickly, as I am showing now, hopefully, maximum might will disappear. On screen now is the EFR of the build that I am using in the footage, with and without maximum might. So on the left we have 308.19, which is without maximum might, and on the right we have 328.98, which is with maximum might. So it's not like actually putting in the effort in to learn how to manage maximum might is a waste of time. It's actually not. It's pretty damn strong, including with burst step. Now if you are a speed runner, utilizing maximum might is more damage, but not utilizing maximum might and just spamming burst step does still end up being ever so slightly more DPS. That being said, when you're not using burst step and you're just shooting normally to build up the ignition gauge to go back into utilizing the rapid fire burst step, most of the time we just essentially casually stroll around in a circle, which gives us a major uptime in maximum might. So in that sense, potentially as well, with speed running, maximum might is actually going to be a more beneficial thing. You have it when not using burst step, but then when you go into burst step, just spam, get all your DPS out, and then go back into normal firing. At least that's what the math says. Whether or not that's how it works in practice, I don't know. I'm not good enough to be a speedrunner in this game, so I can't test it to that degree. Maybe if someone is a light bowgun speedrunner and they want to experiment utilizing maximum might in their build, please do and let me know. Right, so the build in the footage that I'm showing is this build. I'm using the Claire gun, which is Radal, Numinos Crown Beta, Arc Vulcan Male Beta, Guardian Arkveld Van Braces Beta, Arc Vulcan Coil Beta, and Numinos Greaves Beta with a Challenger Charm 2. This might seem a bit weird, but we get Weakness Exploit 5, Constitution 5, Agitator 5, Maximum Might 3, Recovery Speed 3, we get a Burst 1, we get a Counter Strike 1, and a Recovery Up 1. Pairing that with Hasten Recovery from the Arc Vulcan set and Super Recovery 1 from Numinos set. This basically means we heal passively over time, as well as we heal when dealing damage. The reason I've gone down this route, which might probably seem a little bit weird to some of you, and you're probably looking at me like, what the hell, this seems very comfortable. It is, but it also still does surprisingly okay to pretty good damage, depending on the uptime of your skills, talents, etc, etc. And the reason I've gone down this route seems a bit weird. I play on keyboard and mouse, and after looking into it and experimenting with light bowguns, and so many times I'll press left and dodge, and my character will go forward, back, or right. There is apparently some weird delay when it comes to mouse and keyboard, and that delay is set to frigging random. and your character just does random stuff at random frigging times, depending on what it is you press. So I wanted a build that is mostly for mouse and keyboard. Realistically, it seems weird to actually make a build because I play on mouse and keyboard and not controller. I wanted a build that would be a little bit safer. I can take a hit, I can survive that hit, and the more damage I do, the more I actually heal, as well as just healing passively. Now, I have struggled to narrow down what the meta is for light bowgun, though shock, horror, gasp, everyone, or at least the most common build, seems to be utilizing 4 Gormagala along with the Numinos chest. Can't really narrow down as to whether they're using Agitator 5 or Weakness Exploit 5. However, I've put Agitator 5 in simply because that one is the stronger variant, depending on your uptime with Agitator. That being said, due to monster hit zone values, I would recommend going Weakness Exploit and just trying to prioritize shooting where you get yellow numbers, normally the head. But here, as you can see, this build has 44.5% effective affinity with like 80% uptime on Agitator. Light Bowgun gets a hell of an uptime on Gormagala, so it's like 90%. And honestly, that's probably me being quite conservative about that value. You can honestly probably get this to like near enough 95 realistically on Light Bowgun. It's very, very strong. And then obviously we can get Evade Window 5 in here. However, due to the changes in Maximum Might, there's no reason as to why we can't put Maximum Might 3 in the Gormagala build and still get to Evade Window, hopefully you can see here, which gives this a huge increase. It takes it from like 308 to 329. Like, so yeah, sad to say this is going to be the strongest light bowgun build. I just don't like running gore. Sorry. So my safety build is a fair bit behind, depending on the uptime of Maximum Might. Actually, I should correct that. You probably get like a 70% uptime on Maximum Might, potentially a bit lower depending on how often you use burst steps. So yeah, that goes down to like 323. So the safety build that I'm running is 304 with Maximum Might. I've turned Counter Strike off because the idea would be to not get hit. However, if you do get hit, it kind of does become slightly comparable, but only for like 20 seconds. So we're just going to turn it off because it's just kind of not a realistic thing for you to run. But yeah, the safety build is a tiny bit weaker. Hopefully you can see over here like the calculated damage. The average per shot or per tick with Pierce 3 will be 24.5, whereas on Gormagala it's like 26. So initial damage doesn't appear to be a lot different, but over the course of a hunt, Gormagala will certainly do more. Now, if you are wanting a build that is slightly stronger, perhaps not on the same level of Gormagala, but still with a decent amount of survivability, we have Numinos Crown Beta, Numinos Shroud Beta, G.arkeld, Vambraces Beta. These 3 pieces keep coming up. And then 2-piece Gormagala. This gives us Weakness Exploit 5, Constitution 5, Agitator 5, Antivirus 3, but only Maximum Might 2. We still get Recovery Speed 2, Burst 1, a Flinch 3, and that mostly really covers it. We are getting Black Eclipse 1 this time around, and we're still getting our Super Recovery 1. Now, when it comes to the EFR of this build, like I said, it doesn't quite keep up with the 4-piece Gormagala. We are at 314.77 effective attack. We're at like 78.5% effective affinity, which is pretty good. We can bolster this if we wish to swap out that Pierce Jewel for a critical jewel, but that is mostly going to be entirely up to you. In this sense, it then does end up beating out Gormagala. However, then again, on the flip side, if we swap to Gormagala, there's no problem with just swapping out the Pierce Jewel 3 for critical boost 3 on the Gormagala, which in this point, it does help to close the gap, but it's mostly going to be dependent on you and how you work. It's more of a build of to help close that gap with gore while still being somewhat relatively safe and functional, depending on how you play. Because the one thing you might have noticed throughout all of this is the Gormagala build, no matter what, even if we do start to run Maximum Might, still does have Evade Window 2, whereas my so-called safety builds don't. Now, if you really want, you can actually put Evasion in here instead of Mighty to give yourself Evade Window 2. We're still at 64% effective affinity, and we've dropped down to like 320 or 321 effective raw with the critical boost. If we swap that back out to pierce, it will drop down a little bit further, like to 305. So it now does depend just how you want to play. My point quite simply is there are options that are not too far behind 4-piece Gore Magala. Although this now has 305.5 effective raw on the Gore Magala build, has like 340 essentially. In terms of overall damage on the Pierce level 3, the average attack you will get with Pierce level 3 on Gore Magala is 26.7, whereas what I'm suggesting is 24.6. So there's a 1.4 difference. This isn't the hugest amount, and over the course of a hunt, it will add up in favour of Gore Magala, but not to a point of where you really should worry about it unless you're speedrunning, which is kind of not the audience I'm trying to cater to. Now for the fun bit, Elemental Light Bowgun. And the question here is chain or not to chain, as in the skill burst. Now, annoyingly, I don't know if it's changed. It seems to have, but very, very minimally. It was previously decided that chain basically doesn't actually even work on elemental ammo. However, from the testing that I did before TU1 and after TU1, it did work, but only on like a very small raw portion of the shot, not the elemental portion of it. So to say that chain doesn't work on elemental light bowguns or elemental heavy bowguns is kind of wrong. The next question is that minimal increase actually even remotely worth it? And generally speaking, the answer is absolutely frigging not. Just to show this, I tested chain with uptime versus latent power with like a 20% uptime, and guess what one did more? On screen now is the damage numbers I got during rapid fire with everything essentially active at maximum uptime with chain, as you can see, and latent power. And latent power wins, which is kind of hilarious. Now, the flip side to this, level 1 latent power is 10% affinity and a 30% decrease in your stamina consumption. And the build I'm actually going to suggest to you outperforms Gore Magala. And there is one level 3 slot spare, and we're not using maximum might, which means my show and tell of utilizing latent power is kind of redundant because we can use that level 3 slot just to slot in one maximum might, which means as long as you have the uptime on it, you essentially always have that 10% affinity, which is outperforming chain in its entirety. Right, so this is my light bowgun build: Gore Magala Helm Beta, Gore Magala Greaves Beta, and Exploiter Charm, and then we have Numinos Shroud Beta and Numinos Overlay Beta, and of course running the G.arkeld Van Braces. They're just so damn strong. For our skills, this gives us the loveliness that is, in conjunction with the weapon, like your elemental attack, I'm using water here as an example, critical element, opening shot, and tetrad. I've seen people spec for salvo, which is 5% to rapid fire. This is good. However, when you run out of rapid fire on an elemental light bowgun, it takes like forever and a day to build it back up. With some hunts, this can be worth it. Something like Gravios, you'll barely have to like not use rapid fire before it dies, but with other hunts, yeah, it ends up being this weird mind game of whether or not salvo actually becomes worth it. In my experience, not really. Yes, it really does help rapid fire, but in the long run, it ends up being quite weak overall to barely like a 0.5% increase across all of your damage. So I do find building it this way to be more beneficial. That being said, if you want to swap in something like Precise for more range, you can do so. And the one I would swap out, honestly, would be Critical Element. Get some Precise in there and you'll be fine. After that, we have Weakness Exploit 5, Agitator 5, Constitution 4, Coalescence 3, and Antivirus 3. And you might notice, like I said, we have that level 3 deco completely empty. I would suggest putting a maximum might in there for another 10% affinity, which is actually silly strong. Now, of course, we have the obligatory Gravios, just to show off the elemental weapons, because this thing is an elemental punching bag, specifically with water. Now, the reason this weapon or this build wins over the 4 Gore is simply just due to uptime. You have a lot more skills to utilize and fall back on in order to actually push the overall build forward, rather than just essentially wholly relying on things like the Gormagala 4-piece, because when that isn't up, yeah, the damage drop-off is actually pretty crazy. But anyway, that is essentially my take on the good old-fashioned light bowgun. Hopefully this will help you out in the future. If not, sorry. However, in the meantime though, have fun, good luck, and don't die. It's bad for the health.